Had to take off my glasses for a moment because not fun, but so I'm recording right now in 8K Raw. Nor do I like walking and vlogging at the same time, so I think I'll just kind of stand here because that could get a little disorienting. So I'm recording in 8K Raw, and sometimes I've been hesitant, not because I'm working with 8K Raw, and finally, since I bought a bigger card, I'm not worried about space so much. It's more about the actual color correction. This video, I'm going to try to color correct as fast as possible to see if we can do a quick workflow in 8K Raw color correction. And grading is another story, but we're gonna do with just color correction and see what's the best way possible so that I can be satisfied and do more RAW projects going forward. I'm also recording proxy, and the proxy file is thankfully already color corrected, so we'll see what we get. So back here at the computer, now I wanted to keep this as quick as possible when it comes to working with this footage. So a first couple of important steps that we must keep in mind when we're doing like 8K Raw. When you're doing 8K Raw, record the proxy file directly from the camera. I'll leave a link from this video so that you can check out my video on how to actually record 8K Raw and proxy at the same time. So once you've done that and you've already uploaded the footage to Adobe Premiere, you should be able to just right click and link the proxies right away by proxies, attach proxies, to transfer both files of course locally, and then just link the proxies so that you can actually scrub through the footage like this. So as you can see, the footage, the intro footage that we just went through is pretty fast. I've got this tabulated right here to toggle the proxies to make sure that we're seeing the proxies versus the raw file. When I unclick this is the actual raw file, and I won't be able to scrub that fast, but because we're working with proxies, I can do it right away. Now, how do we get the raw footage to look close to this? Now, what you're probably saying is, I recorded like that. Why would I bother to want to do it in RAW? Well, let me tell you one of the advantages of RAW. That is the fact that recording earlier, when I'm passing by this area right here, you see that all of these buildings are blown out. But if we toggle the RAW footage, you're going to see a lot more detail actually exist, from the colors in the sky to a lot more of the town that you can see, because you get that added dynamic range. But you're saying, okay, I could have recorded log and get that. True, you could record log and get more dynamic range, but you get an extra bit of dynamic range when using Canon Log 3, and that's what you're able to use with RAW. Now, R5 might get an update to Canon Log 3 in the future for regular encoded files, but at least right now you'll need to actually use RAW. And the other thing that actually let me do is actually change white balance, tint, and exposure without destructing the file, which is really important. This is an actual white balance adjustment. Now, I had it set to sunny day, so that would be 5600 Kelvin, so it was mostly, from a white balance perspective, okay. But we want to do a quick color correct, and I'm going to show you exactly how to get it to look like the intro, which is what I had. Based off of this, initially, what I'll do here, by default, you might have Cinema Gamma and Canon Log 2 as your color spacing gamma. What I like to use, and it's the quickest way for me to actually start putting the natural colors back in the scene, is I'll do BT709. Yes, you're recording enough information to get BT 2020, but my personal preference is BT709 because that brings it back to, I think, a comfortable feeling for me. To each his own. And I don't have an HDR screen right now available, so I think for the most part I want to see what it's going to look like to most audience who's going to watch this footage in a non-HDR screen anyway. Once it becomes more prevalent, perhaps I'll do HDR footage. And then I switch from Canon Log 2 to Canon Log 3, because Canon Log 3 has less dynamic range, but it adds a little bit more contrast to the scene, and that, as far as I understand, is the limit of this camera, because this camera doesn't have like 15 plus stops of dynamic range. You're really not getting the full benefit of Canon Log 2. So I switched to Canon Log 3, and you could already see from this edit that it's starting to get a little bit more color information. I've already done some basic lumetri color scope additions to that file that, boom, made it to pretty much something that I'm comfortable with. And I'll show you right now as to what I changed. Now, what you'll notice is the first thing I did was input a LUT. right onto the file. You can download the LUT from Canon's website. Now, if you go to Canon's support site for the R5, you can actually, when you go to the software portion, you could download Canon lookup table from their website. Actually, it was last updated on October 19th, 2020, to get all of the Canon LUTs that will be, of course, an advantage to your camera, so you can actually begin to color correct it as soon as possible. So what I applied was BT709 Canon Log 3 to BT709 YDR. And I got the first portion, BT709 Canon Log 3, from here, BT709 Canon Log 3. So there are a few options that the file gives you access to when you download it from the Canon website. So just pick the one that really applies to your color space and gamma, and then convert it to what you need it to be to get the look that you want. So I chose this, so you can choose this exact LUT as well if you want it to look similar to mine. But again, we're going quick. We had the proxy that we recorded along with the 8K, so we're able to scrub smoothly. Actually, I've got RAW turned on, so maybe it's not so smooth. But we're able to scrub smoothly when we have that. We see a final look of color. To make it easier on you, just turn on the log file when you reach a frame that you want to work with, and then just work in that frame, and then go back to your proxy file. That way you can scrub to maybe see another section, and then turn it on and off. That way you could just see those sections, and it doesn't slow down your computer too much. Now when it comes to LUTmetry, now that we've got the input LUTs already applied, I actually brighten the whites a little bit more just to get it near the top of here. And then I added some saturation to bring in some color on this scene. And that's about it in the initial color edit, because I didn't want to go too extreme because I had a lot of scenes, and I just wanted to copy and paste these settings to all of my file settings here. And once I did that, I was pretty much ready to go with one additional color tweak. So I took all the edited files and I created a new timeline where I had actually all my edits here and all the color corrections that I did here. I created a new sequence and I just copied over that 8K color correct sequence onto here, so it acts like one file. You could also add an adjustment layer to the top of these quick edits, right? So I'll put it on the top, and in this adjustment layer, and the reason I'm separating it is because I want everything to have a regular form of final color correction. So in this final color correction, all I'm doing is just maybe boost up the saturation a little bit more, boost up the contrast, and probably pull the shadows down a little bit. Now what I'm looking for in these edits is I don't want the darker areas or the blacks to get too crushed on this scene. No, that's probably a little too saturated, but you could tweak it as much as you want. But the point is this, that I want to make sure that everything is brought in, nothing's blown out too much, but it's got a good, nice contrast for the scene so that it looks more natural. Now, if I take off any of the edits, the logs started off this way, and it looks like this. A lot more saturated, a lot more colorful, a lot more contrasty, to my liking, and this is before I add some really intense, like deep color correction and not color correction, but color grading tips, so I can get the scene mood-wise to look how I want. But at least saturated, and perhaps it's a little bit too saturated, and I could desaturate it a little bit to get it more natural. Sometimes I like kind of overdo it on the saturation, but I think I brought it down to a point where I think it might look a little bit more natural and not so oversaturated at this point. So once again, I'll look at it with no correction, and I've got the correction. Again, it was just slight tweaks to the initial file before we really start color grading for a certain style that you might be looking for. And again, it was like this, and I started it like this, and the proxy file, which would have been what we recorded, would have looked like this. Now, when you compare this to this, I think this shot with Canon Raw looks a ton better, and you get a lot more dynamic range than I would have gotten. Now let's look at what else I was doing that day. There we go, on to the next store. Apparently they didn't have the one phone that I was looking for, so going to the next store. Gift buying can be funny business. But anyway, here we go. This is my day today. Searching for the right phone. See you later. Now on to the parents' house. They have their door locked, so I gotta unlock the door. They're not expecting me, so it'll be pretty. It's always a nice reaction when I come home. That's not working, so almost like there's someone trying to break in, but I break in all the time. I don't break in, I have the key to my parents' house. As we walk in. And now I visited my parents. That went pretty well, spent a lot of time over there. And what's funny is I record a lot of 8K and whatever, just for personal video. And the funny thing is that I have not had the overheating happen once. In fact, the timing hasn't gone down on 8K. I know I talk about that a lot, but I have an 8K raw video camera with image stabilization, full frame. Shoot. I do prefer this recording setup over the C70 because you have a little bit more ability than you would have with the C70 because you have all of these recording features and raw capability internally. But the C70 has great codecs for actually working with the footage later, which I like. But let's see. Again, the grading is going to be one of my last challenges because I can edit raw smoothly, but grading, I never feel like I get it right. Here we go. Alright, so now in that scene I spoke about how grading has always been a challenge, and why it's been a challenge has always been related to the fact that when you're working with RAW, and this is something, I'm not an expert on everything, so I want to tell you what my weakness is. So like I said, I was talking about the difficulties of editing the RAW files. In this particular scene, of course, I've done most of the edits, if not all the edits on this scene. But if I removed anything that I did on the edits, my big challenge was when I'm working with Cinema Gamut, for example, in that color space, I never thought that even when I adjusted the colors, they were always in the slight greenish hue, and it never really looked natural. Even when I would apply a LUT, it just didn't give me the right look, and I was not a fan of how it made me look when I'm actually working with that footage. So because of that, I was not a fan of like this whole look, and I just ended up getting frustrated and said, you know what, I don't even want to work with raw footage because I can't color correct. Until I realized, you know what, I still had the option for BT709, and that made it easier to edit with. But another one of the frustrations that is important to note when it comes to working with raw footage, and this is actually a tip when it's based off of Adobe Premiere itself. Now, Adobe Premiere is the software that I mostly prefer, even though DaVinci Resolve is amazing even with raw footage. But Adobe Premiere, initially I was able to work with the raw footage somewhat, and even though it took a long time to render, it still worked. I had 16 gigabytes of RAM as well. But then, after an update or two, it was impossible to edit with. Impossible. In fact, I started noticing that my footage with, for example, Blackmagic Raw, which is an easy codec to work with, was also crawling. It was almost anything that I was working with was not rendering right, and it was like actually crashing. And then I realized that I think I have a memory issue because my computer was just slowed down to a crawl. So I had 16 gigabytes memory, and I never had a complaint with it. But I knew memory was an issue, so I upgraded to 64 gigabytes of RAM. And that almost completely solved my issues because the usage of raw files. Now I'll show you how much Adobe Premiere is actually taking of my RAM. Right now, if you look at the top, it's taking about 12.4 gigabytes of RAM. Just using Adobe Premiere in one frame, not even doing anything else. And when I was actually rendering the 8K footage, it took anywhere from 25 to 30 gigs of RAM, which I didn't even have previously, so no wonder it was crashing previously. So that's something to keep in mind. If you want, unfortunately, with the updated Adobe Premiere, if you want to actually work better, not only do you need that expensive computer, but RAM is so important so that you can actually output these video files. And I still was able to output video files, but I had to shift the workload to the processor and actually use software rendering rather than OpenGL rendering and using the video card. So that's just a little tip. So that essentially helped my editing when it came to color correction a lot more. So you definitely need the computer, whereas actually a few months ago I was working with a lot less powerful computer. It slowed down to a crawl. So there you go. So I've been looking for this damn phone all day. So I'm going to another store. I've probably been in like to 12 stores looking for this dang phone. I can't find it. But in this current setting right now that I have music playing in the background. Hopefully it doesn't do anything to my channel. But I've got skies that look blown out. And my face is almost blown out a little bit too. But skies blown out, but they're actually quite blue everywhere. I want to see if I can grade that. See you later. So talking about grading those skies, that scene is right here. This is the raw file. Now you can see that the skies are kind of bluish. And there's some detail in the skies. You've got my face, although that's a blurry shot. You could see kind of the background for the most part. As you can see, there's some highlights that are blown out. None of the blacks are crushed because, of course, I didn't bring them down in this version. But I will show you the proxy file. In the proxy file, most of the sky was blown out. A lot of color is pretty much gone. A lot of the details here are gone as well. And this is a proxy file right out of the camera when what would have been my recording if I didn't use the raw recording. Again, using Canon Log, you can recover a lot of that too anyway. These are the benefits of really using Canon Log and Canon Raw. Though Canon Log, you only get Canon Log, you don't get Canon Log 2, which is what I'm using here, that recovers a little bit more detail than you would with the original Canon Log, because Canon Log is like a 12-stop limit, if I'm not mistaken. And with this, you get kind of closer to 13 stops with Canon Log 3, which is awesome. But again, look, blown out details here. Let's see what it looked like on the raw file. On the raw file, after color correction adjustments, it's still really bright in that one portion. But of course, I was facing the sun directly. But now you have details in the sun. You can see a little bit more details on my forehead. And that's what it looked like. But again, I was looking to see if the sky was captured. And in this scene, you can see detail there. Turns out my shoot was a success. So from that perspective, I want to just say that recording RAW does have its advantages. Is it necessary all the time? No, I'm not recording RAW right now. I'm also not using the R5 right now. I'm using my 5D Mark IV because I've got the R5 here. So it depends on your situation what the best work situation will be. But in that day, I recorded a whole day in 8K RAW, thankfully to a 1 terabyte card that I have, and never once worried about overheating. I recorded a bunch that day. I dumped out most of my footage because I didn't need that much. I was just pushing the camera as much as I possibly wanted to, and it worked just fine. So those are quick, I mean, this video probably went on a little bit long, but those are quick methods of recording RAW and grading it quickly. Final advice, record proxy file right on the camera. When you import it into Premiere, link it to the proxy file. Make sure you have the LUT downloaded. Download the LUT. Make sure that when you go into your controls for your raw controls, pick, if you want to be like me, pick Canon Log 3 and pick your BT709 color gamut. Then apply the input LUT and then add a few tweaks to exposure in Lumetri. And that shouldn't take more than a couple minutes. And you already have something to start with when it comes to grading your raw footage. Let me know if you have any questions. This is the way I do it. There really is an unlimited amount of ways that you can actually color correct and then color grade footage to your liking. That's just how I do it for these quick videos. And as always, you can like, share, and you can make my day if you subscribe today. This is Magnus, and I'm out. You guys are the best. Thank you for always supporting my channel, especially those who keep watching. See you later.